The first time Nathan Cole asked me why I was helping him date, the question landed like a dropped glass in a quiet room, sharp and unexpected, and I remember thinking how strange it was that a single sentence could expose everything I had been trying so hard to keep hidden. If you were standing where I was then, holding a phone that wasn't yours, guiding someone else toward a life you secretly wanted for yourself, would you have had the courage to stop, or would you have kept going just to avoid the truth? I worked as an executive assistant in downtown Chicago, the kind of job that blurred the edges between professional and personal until you no longer knew where one ended and the other began. Nathan was my boss, a widowed man in his late 30s who carried his grief quietly, like a coat he never took off. I had been hired 2 years after his wife passed, and in that time I learned the rhythms of his life, the way he drank his coffee black when he was stressed and forgot to eat when deadlines piled up. Somewhere along the way, concern turned into something warmer, something more dangerous, and I hated myself for it. The dating profile was his idea at first, born out of pressure from well-meaning friends and a sister who worried he was disappearing into work. I helped because it was my job, because I was good at reading people, and because saying no would have meant admitting how much it hurt. I selected photos where his smile looked real, wrote a bio that softened his sharp edges, and suggested women who seemed kind and patient. Each match felt like a small betrayal, and yet I smiled and encouraged him, telling myself this was what support looked like. Life outside the office wasn't kind to me either. I rented a small apartment on the south side, still paying off my mother's medical bills after cancer took her, still working extra hours because rest felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. Love had always been something other people stumbled into, not something that knocked on my door. So I convinced myself that helping Nathan find happiness was enough, that proximity to warmth could substitute for being held. The night everything shifted, a late winter storm trapped us in the office long after everyone else had gone home. The city outside the windows glowed with ice and headlights, and the quiet felt intimate in a way that made my chest ache. I was showing him messages from a woman named Rebecca, pointing out shared interests, rehearsing optimism like a script I knew by heart. That was when he looked at me differently, not as an employee or a helper, but as someone he saw, and his question came softly, almost like a confession, about why I was really doing this. I felt exposed in a way I hadn't since my mother's last days, when honesty became unavoidable. If this happened to you, if the person you cared for suddenly noticed the weight you were carrying, would you have told the truth, or would you have protected them at your own expense? I told him the safe version, that I liked seeing him happy, that it felt good to help. But something in my eyes must have betrayed me, because his voice dropped, and in that moment he asked me to take him out instead that night, not as an obligation, but as a choice. What followed wasn't a dramatic confession or a sweeping romance. It was awkward and uncertain and filled with fear. We walked through slushy streets to a diner that smelled like coffee and old memories, sitting across from each other like strangers learning a new language. He talked about his wife, about the guilt of moving forward, about nights when the house felt too big. I talked about my mother, about loneliness, about how being strong all the time had left me exhausted. There was no promise, only understanding, and somehow that felt heavier than any declaration. The weeks after were harder than I expected. Office walls don't disappear just because feelings change, and we both struggled to navigate the line between professionalism and something fragile that had begun to grow. There were days when I thought it would have been easier if he had chosen Rebecca or any other woman from the app, days when I questioned whether I was just a convenient comfort. Healing is not a straight path, and loving someone who is still grieving means accepting shadows as part of the light. Gradually, trust replaced fear. We learned each other in small, ordinary ways, sharing lunches, walking along Lake Michigan on Sundays, allowing silence to be a companion instead of an enemy. Nathan stopped wearing his grief like armor, and I stopped pretending I didn't need anyone. Our relationship didn't erase the past, but it honored it, building something new without denying what had been lost. One evening, months later, I found myself back at my apartment, boxes packed because I was moving into his place, and I paused to look around the empty rooms. I thought about the woman I had been, helping someone else date while quietly breaking her own heart, and I wished I could tell her that sometimes kindness returns to you in unexpected ways. If you're listening to this and you've ever put your own feelings aside because it felt safer, ask yourself what might change if you didn't. Before the story ends, I want to know what you think, so take a moment and comment below with what choice you would have made in that situation. And if this story truly touched your heart, gently consider liking, commenting, sharing, and subscribing, because sometimes these small acts of connection are how hope finds its way back to us.